Thank you all for joining us here, followers of the Great Transformation. Make sure you're following Alexander Vindman, a man who does not need an introduction, but I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction from the way that I perceive him and why we've titled this talk, What the Meaning of American Independence Day is, as we head into this July 4th weekend and celebrate the independence of America, but also the idea of America. Alexander Vindman, to me, represents the best of who we are. The idea of the, and I don't know if the right word is mythology, Alex, you tell me, but the idea that America has always believed itself to be, which is a shining city on a hill, a beacon of hope to people from all over the world. I think it's central to your story, to your family story, to the struggles that brought you here, the deep, passionate love you have for this country, for its ideals, for what it stands for, this beacon. And your American story, I think, is just so needed at this time. There's so much going on in the world that you are so uniquely able to kind of explain to people. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in Ukraine, in the war with Russia. We're going to talk a little bit about the Middle East. But I was hoping you could talk first and foremost about kind of where your mind is at, where our country is at as we head into this birthday celebration of the idea of America and Americanness, and what is the status of America? What's the state of America at this time, Alex?
Well, thank you for having me on, Mike. Frankly, I look to you when I want to understand different aspects of our society, and appreciate you having me on, or us having a live together. You know, I think the 4th of July has always been complex to different parts of our society, and maybe it was an easy question to answer a few years ago, a decade ago. It
Yeah.
was your question answer, that we are singular, unique, the shining city on a hill. Um, it's become a lot more challenging. It's become a lot more challenging because I think we're discovering things about ourselves, maybe aspects that elements of our society, minority groups in particular, kind of took for granted and um, embraced America in a beautiful way, maybe in a special way, as critical patriots critical patriots, understanding that we were imperfect, that we were created to strive to be a more perfect union, and I think all of us could see that now, which is actually a pretty interesting and amazing opportunity to learn about ourselves and how much is left undone. And I'm kind of reflecting on that as I'm thinking about this really powerful question. 249, a big a round number 250, right around the corner. How far we've come, how much of this more perfect union we've created, and how much more work is left to do. And clearly, there is a lot of work to do. There's a lot to celebrate. I think the 250th, in a lot of ways, we have to, in this dark moment where Donald Trump is trying to undo much of the progress, take us backwards, maybe even take us all the way to before we became this beautiful democratic republic. Um, there's still a lot to celebrate about the singular role the U.S. has had in the world, welcoming immigrants from all corners, even with challenges. I mean, different immigrant populations at different times have had enormous challenges, kind of joining the American project and taking part in the American dream. But um, at the same time, as we celebrate, we just need to recognize how much is left to do, and the fact that Uh, many of us don't necessarily share the American values that most of us do, and I believe that. I think most of us share these American values. Some of us don't. Some of us will be happy to embrace authoritarianism. Some of us will be happy to be nativist and isolationist. But I think that they're the minority, and maybe this is a little overused. The silent majority needs to make its voice heard and wake up from its complacency and its apathy. The apathy component being those folks that were left behind, that didn't believe in the American dream, that didn't have access to the American dream, need to be. I think there's an opportunity in this chaos. They need to be drawn in to the way our to the promise of kind of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sounds a little bit cliche, but I
No.
hope could use some of that, as we hit the 250th mark and we approach July 4th. And I think the reason that we could do that is because we have some dark days ahead. We have a lot of folks that are under pressure. The undocumented immigrants, folks like myself that are naturalized citizens. I came to the U.S. when I was 4 years old, like so many other Americans, as a refugee, and those pressures are going to build. And I think that folks that didn't participate, they were like, what is the reason for me to participate? I'm not benefiting in the American dream anyway. Well, things are going to get worse, and the way to claw back kind of guardrails and opportunity is to participate in the process. And those complacent folks, I think that might be an easier way to realize change, because those folks are the ones that were like, you know what, Trump might give me another 2, 3, 5% on my 401k. Let me go with that. Or that believed his promise of having some sort of positive effect on inflation. Understandable, but now you can't delude yourself because it's right in front of you. Yesterday, I actually did a big event in Miami. Very quickly, I had to race back. I was in Aspen at this kind of high-minded ideas festival, but it was an opportunity to talk about my work in national security, and I almost missed my flight back. It was like literally minutes. The app said 30 minutes to get to my next gate. I think I made it there in 8 because I had about 400 people waiting for me to do a talk at this beautiful kind of old church in Miami, and I was not going to let people down. One of the people that showed up said that they thought that Trump was going to be better on national security, better on support to Ukraine, which is shocking because if you scratch the surface, that wasn't going to be the case. But this is an example of those complacent people that could be woken up and brought into the fold. So that's what I'm kind of spend my time rallying against. And just to finish up on the 4th of July, I'm going to celebrate it. I think it's an important thing to do, to recognize both where our shortcomings are, but how still important this country is, indispensable to the world, and that it remains a good actor.
Alex, let me say, so much to unpack there in such a great way. I was in Miami yesterday myself, trying to get back this way. I had a 6-hour delay in Chicago, and I was there for a week, and your name did keep popping up. So I'm not. Well, I don't want to go in there too much, but there's a big buzz about Alex Vindman happening in Florida right now, for good reason. But what I'm hearing throughout your words is there is a sense of optimism that I think people need to hear from somebody like you at this moment in time. You were a refugee yourself as a child. Your family left to come here. And you acknowledge, yes, there are problems, but you always start from the premise that there are reasons to be optimistic. And this is a dark hour. But I think people need to hear, especially from you at this time, what is the nature of that optimism? Is it who you are, or what are you seeing in the country that we need to hold on to right now?
Yeah, so I think it's part of who I am. I think it's important to have kind of um I don't. Optimism by itself sounds, very kind of flighty and wishful. I would say that practiced optimism, meaning that it's grounded in experience, and that's understanding how difficult the world is outside the United States. It's having, traveled this crisscross this country many times. I've been to every state, and especially with this book, and that was years ago. That was before, that was just a project of mine to see this beautiful land. But even since my book came out in February, just crisscrossing the country back and forward. That's another reason I'm going out to the Pacific Northwest to do a book talk with Third Place Books. Yesterday, I was at Books and Books in Miami. So, I think it's this practiced optimism that probably is a source of resilience for me, that it's not wishful thinking, it's understanding that we have dark days ahead, but that there is a path, there is a way to get to where we want to be, navigate out of the Trump era. I'm going to say something, a little bit sounding a little bit funny and facetious. We're almost there. We're a eighth of the way through the Trump administration. We're 6 months down. We have a long way to go.
Yeah.
We've survived the first 6 months. I think the next 6 months are going to be potentially more challenging because we're headed into a period of time where, the guy thinks he could take on some foreign adventures because it looks good for PR. I think that feels very empowered and emboldened with regards to the fact that there is no oversight from Congress dominated by Republicans. And until folks start pushing back, and there have been a handful of folks, I mean, at extremely high cost, Tom Tillis, the senator from North Carolina, refused to sign on to this bill. He's now no longer running for reelection. He was planning to run for reelection in 2026. Don Bacon, also in Nebraska, who's also been a good supporter of Ukraine, no longer running, standing out. So these onesies and twosies are going to be like crushed and hammered. But there is a moment, I think, of deep self-preservation coming out of the Republican Party, and that is on the back end of this year, even with these smaller elections like the gubernatorial in New Jersey and the gubernatorial in Virginia, my former home state, that could amount to landslides. In New Jersey, it would stay blue. In Virginia, it would be red to blue. And if it's a resounding kind of a victory, which it looks like it's going to be because of the massive government cuts and how disproportionately it's affecting Northern Virginians, and my twin brother's district in particular has been disproportionately affected. But that kind of resolute mandate can really start to trigger the self-preservation instinct of politicians, and then I think you know, even before the midterms, we have a little bit of a check on presidential power. But I think these next 6 months are going to be particularly tough, and then we make it through the first year. So I could see a way, we even in this tough time with a lot of people suffering. Alligator Alcatraz just opened up, a lot of people suffering. But we could navigate past this, the momentum building on No Kings, Indivisible, and all these other protest movements, and then we have some accountability seeping in, and then when we get control of the House, maybe the Senate, stranger things have happened. Then we could really start to curtail his excesses and abuse of power, because that's what he's been doing. He's been rampantly, um, um, that's not even the right word, but just kind of uh, endlessly and pushing and abusing power. Yes.
Do you feel like the tide has turned a little bit? You're seeing a split kind of in the MAGA movement a little bit more than in the past?
So I wrote a piece about it. I think we're seeing the fissures. So that's the before the fractures, before the breaks, we see the fissures, and I think some of those are happening around. I think some of those are happening. It's my guys here.
We love that. We love
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
I've got three of them. I've got a German Shepherd, Australian Shepherd. He's a very good boy. He's a good.
Shepherds.
Yeah. And I've got a trophy dog. He'll pop in here in a little bit. He's a golden doodle. He's a little bit of um so I think with regards to where we are right now, there are some breaks forming. So certainly, this biggest, maybe most important in regards to electoral politics break between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And the reason is the 1-2 punch of a Trump endorsement and Musk money really terrified a lot of politicians. That's a hard thing to overcome. But that break is saw that unfold earlier. People thought it was going to be patched up. That didn't make sense to me. That it was going to be patched up. These guys have massive egos, and it's only going to get worse. And now Trump is talking about denaturalizing and deporting Musk and stuff like that. So that's an important rupture that's formed. I think the divide within the MAGA movement, this kind of isolationist America First movement, and the other part of MAGA that is slightly more traditional, like Iran hawks, that are that are still kind of focused on settling scores in certain regards. And I could understand that, frankly, to a certain extent, because over 46 years of the Iranian regime, they've inflicted more damage and more pain on the U.S. than just about anybody. Like in terms of casualties, like core casualties, and I'm not talking about like the Russians have created a lot more havoc, but in terms of killed and blood spilled, there's nobody that really comes particularly close to Iran and the amount of lives lost and impacted. I was wounded by an Iranian explosive device in Iraq.
I didn't know
So
that.
there were that divide between, those folks that want to use military power, believe that we still have a role to in the world, and be engaged in the deeply isolationist folks. That's a divide, including within the administration. That's where like JD Vance falls on one side, and other cabinet secretaries and Trump can be convinced, as he was in Iran, to take action. So those are, and Steve Bannon is in this camp. So in the isolationist camp. So, but he's also very, very hawkish on China and things of that nature. So like, you could see this big tent that Trump was able to assemble for the purposes of winning the presidential is going to be hard to keep intact, and you could see folks starting to peel away. We're relatively early days, although you know, we're almost done with Trump, but we're still in the early days of this divide.
Again, love that optimism there. Now, some of these splits and a lot of what you're talking about is kind of the global theater, right? What's happening, obviously, in the Middle East and what's happening in Ukraine, two enormously large subjects, but one that you're uniquely capable of sort of explaining. Can you explain to us what you see happening at this moment? Start with either one that you want, because there is some interconnectedness on how America is viewed on the global stage. But where do you think we are at now in both
Yeah.
conflicts?
So I'm going to start big picture and work my way in. And for those folks that aren't familiar with me, I had almost a 22-year career in the military. My last position was as the director for European affairs on the National Security Council. So I was responsible for kind of national level interaction between us and our allies and our adversaries, for that matter. And the reason I was in the White House is before that I wrote the strategy for how we contend with Russia, everything from some levels of cooperation through competition, through conventional warfare, through nuclear war, and then before that I was in Moscow. So that's my for 3 years working as an attaché in the embassy in Moscow and Ukraine before that. So lots of experience covering this portfolio, but and geopolitics in general. So I think fundamentally we should understand that the U.S. is unreliable to our allies, or maybe eventually we become predictable, but unreliable, meaning that they can't count on us as a fellow democracy, as a an ally in the challenges they face, the security challenges they face around the world. Now, some people might point to the fact that Trump just came back from NATO, and there was, you know, we'll see what there is with regards to follow through, but there was a success in getting the Europeans to um, put more of their national resources into defense. Something that every administration really, since the early 2000s, has been working hard to get the Europeans, the wars in the Middle East were one of the earlier drivers, but we wanted the Europeans to play a bigger role in rebuilding their defense industrial base, and training their troops for national defense. It really didn't become serious until throughout 2008. More serious in 2014. There were some pledges made in 2014 under President Obama for all states to spend 2% of their GDP. Then, when the war started in full scale in 2022, it became even more serious, because then there was a really, there was a looming threat. Russia, truly kind of aggressive and willing to use its military force to take over territory. And now we're at, so the pledge was 5%. So that's a major graduation due to the threat environment. But Trump is going to take credit for it. And that means $1 billion that a billion euros that the Europeans are going to put into defense. That's a massive amount of resource. So they'll be able to start to close some of the gaps and the underspending in this peace dividend for like the last 4 years. But the one of the reasons that they're willing to go there is because we are no longer reliable, and they need to start to think about their national defense. So I think that this mainly pertains to Europeans, but also in Asia, our traditional allies, Japan and South Korea and Australia, are worrying about what it means when the U.S. can't be there to show up to defeat authoritarian regimes or aggression from the enemies of democracy. And at the same time, our enemies, traditional enemies, North Korea, Russia, China, believe that there is an opportunity to wheel and deal. There's an opportunity to convince the president that there's something in it for him personally in a lot of cases, and in that regard, kind of get him to hold back his support for allies or come in on their side. As an example, Russians have been dangling this idea of economic cooperation deals to be made, and that has been enough to keep the president deeply engaged with Vladimir Putin, who he's a fanboy of, and keeping the relationship with Ukraine at arm's length, but frankly now kind of even um, in spite of the Ukrainians being willing to compromise, in spite of the Ukrainians signing this rare earth deal, kind of casting him to the side. The latest announcement over the past couple of days was that the U.S. is going to cut support,
Yeah.
and so this requires a little bit of explanation. This is, this isn't the part of the $60 billion that came through in April of 2024. That was a interesting vehicle, kind of like an emergency vehicle in which we took weapons out of our stockpiles, kicked it over to the Ukrainians, and then spent almost all of that money to replenish our stocks by buying the newest and shiniest objects, from the defense contractors. So that money is basically all kind of but run out, and the president hated that idea because he thought we were like giving away stuff, when in fact he was helping drive the defense industrial base. He was making sure that our military is well equipped, and he was also making sure that um, Ukraine, which was pushing back on our most inveterate and kind of aggressive actor, Russia, was keeping them occupied and bogged down. One of the reasons that we have a transformed Middle East is because of the fact that Russia didn't have the resources to prop up Iran or Syria before that, or support the terrorists in Hezbollah and things of that nature, like they have, either politically with invites to the Kremlin or just with material. So we end up in a situation in which, Trump at this point is more than happy to engage with our adversaries on these sweet deals, even though they're not going to deliver. Throwing Ukraine under the bus. This cut that I was referring to is for things that were promised over the course of years, that the U.S. was kind of helping support. So this is multi-year dollars that already were kind of settled, and for critical systems like defending cities from Russian drone attacks and missile attacks. So that is pretty. There was no reason for it. There is no this limited amount of resource that was coming off the production lines that was going to Ukraine was much more useful to Ukraine than anything that we would stockpile if we had a major confrontation with China or something of that nature years down the road. So it's a bunch of smoke and mirrors. I think it's worst case scenario, it could be a drug deal of sorts where Russia stays out of some of the things that the U.S. is interested in, and the U.S. decreases its support to Ukraine and gives Russia kind of helps nudge an advantage for Russia.
So can the Europeans financially or through hardware bolster the Ukrainian defense enough to hold the Russian threat back?
Yeah. So I mean, to be frank, I think the answer is not initially, but it may not even matter that much, because the reality is that the Russians don't have the juice to crush Ukraine. The Russians can really at this point muster relatively modest forces. We're talking about like they try to do a spring kind of summer offensive, and that petered out relatively quickly because the Ukrainians could see him coming, and with their indigenously, domestically produced drones, kind of plaster him and kind of block him and hold him, and there's some indications that they're pushing him back. The Russians, the best they could do is really rain terror on Ukraine, so punish civilian infrastructure, rain terror on cities. They um, they could make some small gains. They're doing it at extremely high cost. We're talking about 1,000 to 1,500 casualties a day. They could make territorial gains, but the pace of advance is is negligible because this is the largest country in Europe, and the costs are too high. So it's not even sustainable for Russia to take these kinds of losses. They need something more dramatic. They need and the U.S. cutting Ukraine off makes things harder, um, but probably doesn't transform the battlefield. What it does is make it graduates the pain over time. The Ukrainian cities are exposed. Eventually, there's a risk that the Ukrainians start to run out of artillery, which the U.S. was providing a lot of artillery, makes it harder to kind of engage in these artillery duels and blunt Russian attacks and things of that nature. Or artillery also is critically important to kind of enabling or Ukrainian advances and counterattacks and stuff like that. So it makes those things harder. Um,
Mhm.
if the cuts off right now, it's material support. If they cut off intelligence sharing, that makes things a little bit harder because the Ukrainians need these communications channels that have been opened up to use these HIMARS, these long range rocket systems to attack Russian concentrations and critical command and control type of things where the leadership is. So it does become harder over a period of time. Over the next 6 months, it's with the U.S. backing off support, it's going to get harder on the Ukrainians. The Europeans can plug some of those holes, but not all of them because we are the arsenal of democracy. And really, what this amounts to is it gives the Russians a lifeline. It gives them some breathing room. It gives them the impetus to fight on. This is the idiocy of Trump's approach. This dude, pledges the end of war, a ceasefire on day one. Then he, strong arms Ukraine. Ukraine is showing a great deal of flexibility, willing to bend over backwards to keep the U.S. engaged. The Russians are entirely unflexible. They still want to subdue their entire country, and all he's doing is, both ratcheting up pressure on Ukraine, but also eliminating leverage because eventually the Ukrainians are like, go f yourself. You're not giving us anything. Why are we listening to you? And he's giving away the farm to Russia, encouraging to fight on. And I think the fact is, as I pointed out, Ukraine has got a lot of staying power. Maybe one other nuance to keep in mind is that is money to be spent. The Biden administration kicked over $20 billion. It was not a gift. It was basically this really kind of crafty idea of leveraging their interest on Russian frozen assets and using that, like looking way many years in advance and just saying, here's this money now. And the Europeans are doing 30 billion. So that's a lot of resources for the Ukrainians to spend money both in Ukraine and in the US, and the Europeans are going to be spending money. So all this is it really doesn't make a huge amount of sense why this guy's bending over backwards because I'll likely sell these things anyway with the Ukrainians buying. Um, but we're encouraging Russia, putting pressure on Europe and Ukraine, and it really is illogical for somebody that wants to get his Nobel Peace Prize by ending the war in Ukraine.
Is there any scenario where Russia has the capacity to occupy the entire country of Ukraine? Like, what does victory look like at this point for them?
Well, there's no chance of that happening, unless the Ukrainians throw up their arms and kind of just the military evaporates and the Russians walk in, because even before you get there, the Russians have a huge way to go. There's 80% more of Ukraine to take over. That's a huge amount of manpower. Then you have to occupy it, and the Ukraine and the Russians are still having a hard time with regards to establishing security, because there's insurgency and guerrilla war going on in the Russian occupied territories and things of that nature. So it is a enormous drain on Russia already, and it really only worked is when Putin thought he could win this war in 3 days, and then kind of use all the forces he had available to kind of suppress and occupy and murder people into submission and stuff like that. So I think part of the idea here is locking in some of the gains. Part of the idea is realizing a failed state with regards to Ukraine, and in so doing, maybe getting a more favorable leadership. But there is not much of a prospect for that threatens Ukraine's sovereignty. In a lot of ways, the worst case scenario is that Russia kind of locks in its current gains, maybe a little bit more. That's what's feasible in this current environment.
So if we could switch now to this bill that was passed in Congress a few hours ago, that dramatically enhances the militarization of the United States streets. This is something, and I'm talking about the ICE budget, which basically by a factor of about 15 increases how much money they have. It's the amount of money that the 168, $170 billion is larger than a lot of militaries of a lot of other countries. This is a dramatic expansion of a domestic, I don't know if the right law enforcement presence in the United States. What does that mean as somebody who's dealt with the kind of might that we're talking about on a foreign
Yeah.
policy basis as a tactician and as an American who I think understands this pivotal, unique moment where we've never engaged in this type of activity before?
It's pretty disgusting. I mean, look, we should understand that, you know, the Senate first said that this bill was unacceptable, for a bunch of different reasons. One of which was Medicaid and Medicare cuts that were gonna, and the way this was gonna balloon the budget was also gonna actually have Medicare cuts, SNAP benefits, all of the basic services that our society needs. From a security standpoint, it's extremely troubling. That is too large a budget for this entity to kind of absorb. So the implications are that they're going to outsource policing. They it's going to if they even if they ramp up quickly, that means it's going to be completely unqualified folks filling those roles, building what amounts to a national kind of police force. That's what ICE is. We don't have something like that, but it's being built into the National Police Force. I think it means that they're likely going to go ahead and have a vast contracts with kind of, you know, what is it? Eric Prince's thing, not Triple Canopy, but what is it? It'll come back to me. What is it? No, Palantir is a different one. My wife is here in the background.
She's
Um,
brilliant too, by the way. Vinman
but
for special people.
Yeah, so it's another one. It'll come back to me. It's just one of these mercenary groups and stuff like that. Uh, Blackwater, yeah, um,
Blackwater.
yeah. So a bunch of the Triple Canopy is an old one. I think that ended up involving itself in war crimes in the Middle East. So they had to rebrand and come up with a different name. So I mean, this is what worries me is that we'll have these kinds of forces coming in and attempting to suppress peaceful protests. I mean, these guys mouth First Amendment rights, but they could care less if it's in opposition. So somebody said it's now Academy. Blackwater is now Academy. Yeah, that's right. I remember that. So look,
Do you
I
envision a world where they're going to militia members and just putting militia members on the payroll as bounty hunters, people, Proud Boys and groups like that, paramilitary groups that are
I think
predisposed to commit insurrection and just put
yeah,
them on the payroll?
I think that is a distinct danger. I think part of the reason that they're going down this route is because the military is not going to be the tool they want it to be to suppress the population. So they need other tools. I think insurrectionists, Proud Boys, militias, bounty hunters are what they're likely to do to outsource. And, you know, we're going to see some tragedies unfold. And it should be crystal clear that, like, my optimism about the future is on the back end of deep, deep pessimism of watching things like this unfold, studying things like this unfold in other corners of the world, and understanding that it's going to create a massive, massive backlash when folks in the communities around this country see what exactly the president has in mind to their neighbors and ultimately to some of them, there's going to be a massive, massive resistance, and that is not something that even with this ballooned law enforcement budget is going to be something that they could contend with. Building a national police force like this takes a long time. If he had a generation, he could get there. There are some examples of, let's say, Viktor Orban kind of solidifying his hold, or uh, Erdogan in Turkey solidifying his hold. Those are multi-year projects to really kind of crush opposition. Um, I don't think something like that happens. We tend to be also a pretty feisty society, and like when pushed, we push back. So I think it's going to result in confrontations and conflicts and things that people can't dismiss as like, oh, those people may have deserved it or something. They should have just let the police go, rampage through their neighborhood. So there's going to be some pushback, and there's going to be a lot of damage, and it's going to blow up in their faces.
Do you think we still have that, Alex, in our character as an American nation, as an American people? I mean, you see it on full display in Ukraine. These are people who know what freedom is. They know what their history is. They know what the Russian threat means. It's not just a battle over a border. There's a very deep, long, many generational history of that the tensions between the Russians and the Ukrainians, but they're the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians are also fighting for freedom. And I kind of look at the things that we fight about now as a country in terms of, these remember these trucker convoys that are fighting for freedom or fighting to not be vaccinated. They're fighting to not look out for fellow Americans. Um, do we have that still in our character?
Yeah. So I guess the premise is: are we too fat, dumb, and happy
Yeah.
to fight for ourselves? I mean, I just think about the way that our predecessors, those folks that are a part of our DNA, stood up and defend this country when push came to shove. And we haven't had one of those kind of existential, critical moments. Our adversaries a lot of times, especially over the past 100 plus years, have come from outside, so it's easier to rally against those. Now we're back to where we were in the middle of the 19th century, and the threat is from within. And I think the fact is that we will we look we think about let's look at it this way. Some the theory to a certain extent is that the right wingers are the folks that own the guns or Second Amendment kind of proponents and stuff like that. But by and large, we're a country in which fighting and kind of um, use of weapons and stuff like that is part of who we are. Right, left, center. I mean, tons of folks have exercised their right to bear arms. And I think those folks that right now think it's okay because it's their enemies that are being dealt with are going to see that it's not limited to kind of the fringe portions of the community. So I think we do have the resources to resist. It sounds like I'm painting a really dark picture that we're talking about like gunfights in the streets to resist law enforcement. I don't know if we're going to get there. I think if we in the worst case scenario, if we do, uh, yes, we have that kind of strength. But I think it's before that we will see an explosion of these protests, especially in response to these horrible abuses of our fellow citizens, and we probably don't won't get there.
Alex, I'm going to end it there. I know you're busy. You've got a big weekend coming up. I am so grateful to have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you talking about the state of America at this moment in time. Again, I think you're uniquely positioned to explain it. You did a really phenomenal job. Thank you for talking about freedom, the fight for freedom abroad. Thank you for fighting for it here. I know it's come at a tremendous cost to you personally and to your family. My best to your family. I know we're going to be hearing a lot more about you the coming weeks and months. However, I can be helpful. I think the audience here, if you're not following Alex Vinman here on Substack, you need to be, you should be. It's the easiest, quickest thing you can do to help in a fight for a great American, a great patriot. And I just want to say, have a very wonderful 4th of July. Alex, appreciate you.
Same to you. Enjoy your Fourth of July, and this is a time to celebrate. Who we are and who we can be. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much.
Bye.